This Q&A was super informative.
It was really cool to get a perspective on an ER episode from the showrunner himself, how he actually went through, the writing process, the shooting process.
You don't know how to get into the industry because that's always the big question. Coming to these things, they give you these answers that you don't know otherwise.
I learned so much at this Q&A. I'm super excited.
It is my distinct honor to welcome tonight's guests. Neal Baer is a pediatrician and writer-executive producer who combines his passion for medicine and storytelling to challenge audiences' views on a broad spectrum of social and political topics. He currently enjoys an overall deal with Fox Television, developing series that push expectations and spur national conversations. Previously, he was an executive producer and showrunner for Under the Dome and A Gifted Man. Prior to that, Dr. Baer was an EP and showrunner for Law & Order Special Victims Unit for 11 seasons. Under his watch, the series received 6 Emmys and a Golden Globe. Before SVU, Dr. Baer wrote and produced the hit NBC series ER for its first 7 seasons, where he received 5 Emmy nominations as a producer and 2 for writing, along with a Writers Guild nomination for Best Dramatic Screenplay. Moderating tonight's Q&A is producer Tova Laiter. Tova's credits include Glory with Denzel Washington, Oliver Stone's Nixon, Evita with Antonio Banderas, and Madonna and Varsity Blues. Give it up.
So I know everybody wants to know exactly how warm was the water
It's warm.
that he had to go in and out.
It was warm. They heated it up. I have this, hello, I'm Neal, thank you for coming. We shot it about a block away in the back lot of Warner Brothers. And in Walton's Pond, I think, where they shot like a lot of pond action on the Waltons. If you remember the Waltons, you might be too young for that. So I have this image of the set decorators throwing pieces of wood so that the tunnel was built. This was like the most expensive show, I think, that had been done really up to that time. For some reason I have it in my head that we spent $6 million. So this was year 2. It was year 2 of ER, and the show was such a hit. We had, this was the highest rated episode ever of ER, and it had a 42 share.
Whoa.
So that would be like, well, there's no drama on television that has a 42 share, not Game of Thrones or, nothing. Sometimes NCIS will used to get 18 million viewers, but this had sometimes over 40 million viewers.
Unbelievable.
So, so it was a crazy time, and so this was the highest rated episode ever of ER, and I just remember, they were heating the water because that kid had to be in there for the whole time, and we shot it over several days, and I was telling Tova that I remember that Cameron Diaz was on the set because she was like, I think dating George at the time, and so it was like, and we were shooting all night, so I got to meet her. So she had done Mask at that point, so she wasn't really well known. So it was a crazy time. It was really fun.
But that's hard work, the running and coming and the rain and the thing.
And it's really hard, and for some reason I always did this.
Was the rain real?
No, the rain was not real. And so what's interesting is I did this on another episode. One of my favorite scene, of course, is when George is this iconic scene where he lifts the boy out of the water. The helicopter happens to shine the light exactly at the right time. Ben. He goes down, he comes up. He goes, and it was in the script. He goes down, he comes up. He goes down, he comes up. And I love how Chris Chulak, who's still directing, he just directed the pilot for the Navy SEALs show at CBS. He racked focus every time, and he's such a good director, and the way that the camera turned when George is going into the tunnel. But, when you're shooting in the rain, we have the rain bars. And so I did an episode a couple years later with Sally Field and Maura Tierney, and we did a one-er with Chris Chulak, the same director, where we were inside the hospital and they come outside into the rain. And so when they yell cut, I always wanted to work with Sally Field. I told her that. So it was like 1 a.m, because on Fridays we would start early on Mondays, and by Friday you'd start later in the day, you'd like move up an hour or two, and if you didn't go over, so that you could shoot way into the night, into Saturday morning, and you could do all your night shooting. So I did a night shot with Sally and Maura, and I said to her, when I was young and I knew I wanted to become a writer, I always dreamed of working with her. And she said, "Oh, what did you see me in? Gidget, Flying Nun?" I said, "Yes," when I was a little boy, but also Norma Ray. If you haven't seen Norma Ray, that was her big breakthrough movie. Yeah. And she, and I said, "I always wanted to write for you," and she burst into tears at 1 a.m. because, she said, no one ever said that to her. And what was amazing was, she and Maura would get wet, cut, because you have to obviously do the master and then the coverage.
Yes.
Go back in, hair blown dry, change into dry clothes, come out and do it again. Well, that happened a lot in this episode with George, who was George was just an amazingly lovely, kind, funny person. And so when he's in different scenes where he's dry and then he has to go out and get wet, well, like in the scene where he's about to light up a joint and then he goes outside, well, they'd have to he went outside and it didn't cut. It was a, oneer. So they'd have to reset it, and he'd have to go back in, get into another tuxedo. So they had lots of tuxedos, and dry off completely so that he's, so that the continuity can keep going. And so I did this show. The reason I put George in a tuxedo is because the year before, the first year of ER, so this was year 2, I did the Christmas episode, and George was in a scene going to a Christmas party where he and Juliana Margulies get in a big fight, and he punches out her boyfriend, Rick Rossovich, this actor who was in Cyrano and a couple other pretty interesting films. And so people said to me, and Rosemary Clooney, who was George's aunt, who was a very famous jazz singer, was in it, and people said to me, "Oh, I love George in the tuxedo." So I was like, how can I put George? So I drew the luck of the draw. I drew, every year we would do a special episode for each actor. So for the first year it was for Tony Edwards, if you've ever seen the episode Love's Labor Lost, where he's delivering a baby in the ER and he thinks he can handle it and the baby dies. And this introduced Bradley Whitford. It was really his first show, and he got nominated for an Emmy, and that was sort of how he took off. And so year 2, it was like George's turn. Then year 3, we did for Noah and Eric and Sherry and Juliana. So I got to do George's special episode, obviously, and we shot a lot of it in Chicago. And you never could now have a star in a helicopter like we did. Like, we shot a lot of it in Van Nuys, so that, inside the helicopter is not really flying in the helicopter, it's in Van Nuys. But there are scenes where George is taking off and is in that helicopter, and I just think they would never allow that now. So I thought, I have to put George in a tuxedo so that people will really take notice and make him the reluctant hero. And then he'll be like the action hero, in the water and stuff, in the tuxedo, and look really sexy. And so that's why I did it. That's why so I thought, well, how do I do that? So I said, well, I'll send him to the opera. So I was like, because why would you wear a tuxedo? And then I stole from myself in 2007, I think, when I had to do, I wanted to do a special episode for Mariska when I was doing Law & Order Special Victims Unit, and I was running it. And so I put Mariska in a black cocktail dress, and I said, choose a dress, we'll pay for it. Well, it's like, don't ever tell an actress to choose a dress that you want to pay for. It was like thousands of dollars, yeah. But I was like, okay, and she looked great. So we put her in this cocktail dress, and she's about to go on a very special date. And then there's a little girl who calls the police and says, I'm trapped in a room, and this guy's coming back, and he said he's going to kill me. And so,
I saw that episode.
Mariska's on the phone for three acts, talking to this little girl, and it's talking to her in Spanish. And so it was like when George sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," Mariska sang nursery rhymes in Spanish. It was like, I better not copy myself too much. So then, so George was nominated for an Emmy for Hell and High Water. He did not win. I forget who won that year. Maybe from Chicago Hope. He's on Homeland, and he's.
And Mariska won for.
So Mariska did win, and she won the Golden Globe. So I sort of felt vindicated. So Mariska won for that episode. So I've learned, like, always put your actors in something different, like
Yes.
tuxedos, particularly to make them look really fantastic, sexy, beautiful, and make them, you know, and then, you know, with Mariska, we shot her eyes in close-up and her mouth in intense close-up, and she called me to the set. Ted Kotcheff, who directed Weekend at Bernie's and
Yes.
Fun with Dick and Jane and
That's
First
how I-
Blood, he directed that episode. And Mariska said, "This is killing my career. He's only shooting in my mouth." I said, trust us. You're going to win the Emmy." And she did, and the Golden Globe. So you have to, you have to take huge chances, I think, and you can in television. It was harder to take chances then. I think it may be easier now. But that's how George is in a tuxedo and all of that.
And that was, this was kind of like a break, great break for him.
This was, because his character was always like the guy who will do anything for kids. He'll like take down the hospital. That was how we got rid of George's character in year 5. We knew George was going to leave after his contract was up, and he was already doing Peacemaker and Batman and all those movies. So we knew that he was going to go. So in year 2, he was really starting to get hot. He hadn't done the movie yet. Peacemaker with Nicole Kidman, I think that was his first. I wanted to show that he could be an action hero, and there was a lot of talk about him, but there were no movies. And I think, you know, I've been told that that's really helped, and he's always been very sweet about it, because it really showed off his abilities, his Cary Grant abilities, his James Bond abilities, his sense of humor. I tried to write everything possible in that. That show did win for Chris Chulak the Directors Guild Award that year, because it's just such an amazing show for that time, and they let us spend the money because we had to build all those sets, and we shot a lot of it in Chicago. Like all the scenes with the helicopters taking off and stuff were in Chicago. And when the
So
kids
when you
are
write a scene like this, when you write something like this, and it's gushing water, and it's rain, and it's like this whole thing, and doesn't somebody from the network say, or the producer,
the network would, or the studio actually, the
Yeah.
studio would say, because
Would
they're the ones who pay for it.
does it really have to be gushing water?
Well, that's
Can
why I
we
was
just
really-
like have it in the tub?
Yes, exactly. Well, that's why I was really lucky, because the answer is no. The show was the biggest, highest rated show in 30 years.
Wow.
So they were like, or the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So the last 30 years. I mean, before there were higher rated shows, you know, MASH and things, when, you know, you only had 3 networks to choose from. So fortunately, it's a different time. No, it was like, okay, yeah, you'll make it up in your budget. And the show was such a huge phenomenon, which we had no idea. We were on against Chicago Hope. Mandy Patinkin won that year. Chicago Hope, Mandy Patinkin, and Primetime Live, which was an ABC News show, and we were predicted to come in 3rd. We had no clue. This show was written by Michael Crichton, the late Michael Crichton, when he was a
Who
medical
wrote
student.
Jurassic Park and other stuff.
And a terrific writer. In 1969, when he was a medical student at Harvard, and Steven Spielberg ended up buying it, and it lay dormant literally in a trunk in Spielberg's office for 25 years until it was found by the person who was doing development for Steven Spielberg back then, Tony Thomopoulos, and gave it to Steven and said, "What's this?" And he goes, "Oh, I was going to make this as a movie. Maybe it could be a good TV show." So they went to NBC, and Warren Littlefield, who was the head of NBC then, and Ohlmeyer, who was there, the two heads, did not like it. No matter what they write and stuff, they did not like it. And they said too many stories, too many, you know, starting in the middle, too many things going on. But because it was Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg, and by then Steven had already done Jurassic Park and E.T. and, you know, it was Schindler's List. He was, you know, they said, well, we'll make it. But they didn't really want to.
Right.
And then they now take credit. Like, we found this script, and it was, like, wonderful.
Yes.
And it was like, no, that didn't happen.
So let me ask you, your father was a surgeon.
Yeah.
Your 2 brothers are surgeons.
Yes.
You went to Harvard Medical School.
Yep.
and then pivot, and suddenly you're writing for television.
Right.
What were you thinking?
I was thinking I had to get out of medical school. No, I
What happened?
well, you skipped something, which was I went to AFI. So I went to Harvard to graduate school in sociology and hated it. And I was at a party one night with people from my, sociology and
Where?
At Harvard, in Boston. And I'll never forget this. This changed my life. And a friend of mine introduced me to her husband, who was a documentary filmmaker. He's still making films. His name is Bester Cram. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, I make documentaries. And, well, what exactly? And he told me, and I was like, something hit me, like, oh, because I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't want to be an academic. And I thought, I have to take this class. And I said, well, are there classes? He goes, well, there's a guy from MIT coming to Harvard named Ed Pincus. And he wrote this book, like, How to Make Films or something that's still published. And he was the kind of the father of cinema verite. He made these films called The Diary and Black Natchez about the civil rights movement in 1960s from African American perspective. And they were cinema verite, really the birth of reality, quote, reality television. And so he said, he's teaching the class. And I said, okay. So I went to interview. You had to interview to get in. And it was only for undergraduates. And I said, well, you have to take me. And he goes, well, you've never made a film. I said, I know, but I know this is what I want to do. And he goes, well, how could you know? And he said, no. So obviously, the end of the story. I'm sitting here. So then the next day he called me and he said, come back. So I came back. He goes, I was a graduate student in philosophy here and I hated it. And I made a movie called Black Natchez and I never looked back. So I'm taking you into this class and I'm going to register you as an undergraduate. And by the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. So he changed my life, and I started making documentaries, and I made this crazy film. I went into, this is how important your professors are. So I went in to go talk to him, and he didn't know I was waiting in his outer office, and he was talking to a friend. He goes, I have this student, and he made a film in an Italian bakery where they're like pouring whipped cream on everything, and it's the most erotic thing I've ever seen. It was like, that was my film. And I was like, wow, I can be a filmmaker. So I started making films, and I made 2 documentaries, and I sold them to PBS, and that got me to AFI. So I went to the American Film Institute as a directing fellow. Everybody I've worked with at AFI never did what they went to AFI as. So there were 3 of us on ER. I was a directing fellow, Lydia was a producing fellow, and Paul was a producing fellow. We were all writers. And Mimi was a cinematographer, Mimi Leader. And she was the director on the show. So it's like you kind of go in and you do things, you never know how it's going to turn out.
Interesting, yes.
And so we got the training, and I've directed one thing, an ABC after school special. How
did you get that? I'm kind of curious how
So I went to AFI, and I was a director, and I had 3 short films. And God, I could tell you so many stories about when Eddie Dmytryk, who's Eddie Dmytryk, one of the Hollywood 10, he made Murder My Sweet and some really interesting films, some really bad films, Raintree Academy with Elizabeth Taylor, Montgomery Clift. And he got so mad. I made a film called Detroit Skyline about the Red Scare in 1950, and he said, you shouldn't make films about times you haven't lived through, and who do you think you are? And I said, well, you made Raintree County. It's about the Civil War. And he got up, and he was going to punch me, and Robert Wise, who directed West Side Story and The Sound of Music, was one of the teachers there, and he held him back because he was going to hit me. I'm sure none of your professors, no, Tova wouldn't do that. But he was going to hit me, so I thought, wow, I merely made an impact on him. So that was like a big moment for me, and Robert Wise was so nice to me after that because I think they were afraid, like, whoa, Neal's going to really sue us for what happened. So I went to AFI, and I wanted to direct. And the best way to get in at that point, there wasn't like all this stuff now that you guys, we can talk in a minute about, I'm doing VR stuff and unscripted stuff, and I do documentaries and TV. But there wasn't that option. You could make a documentary or you could make TV. And the best way in was through after-school specials, because that's where Michelle Pfeiffer got started, and Cynthia Nixon auditioned for me. She was a kid. All these people got their starts as directors or as actors on these shows that were on at 4 in the afternoon that were little sort of morality plays. And mine was about a girl who sees her father having an affair and her best friend who gets gonorrhea from her boyfriend. So it was the first one who had 2 storylines. In fact, I was the first person ever on television to say, when Mike Warren, who was the star of Hill Street Blues, is talking to the kid as the doctor, he said, "Do you have discharge from your penis?" Never said before. Probably wouldn't be able to say it now.
Yeah.
Actually, on network television. But they allowed us at 4 p.m. So
When all the kids are watching.
Exactly. So it was like, and so I wrote and directed that and I just wrote to every producer in town who did after-school specials and met some really interesting, crazy people, and pitched this idea of doing 2 storylines instead of 1. And they were like, ABC said, "Wow, no one's said that before. Let's do it." So I wrote it and I directed it. And then I was in a grocery store, and I literally bumped my cart into John Wells, who directed August Osage County and Burnt recently, and he was the showrunner of ER and West Wing. And so, and Shameless now. And we were best friends since we were 9 years old. I'm from Denver, and we were in elementary school together. And we literally bumped carts. And I was like, "John, Neal, what are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I'm working on a show called China Beach." He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I just did an ABC after school special for ABC. And I'm trying to be a writer." And he goes, "Oh, come on in and pitch." So I went to Warner Brothers, and I didn't have anything to pitch. I said, "Well, what should I pitch?" He goes, "Oh, no, we have an idea for you. Here, take this idea. It's Dana Delaney and Marg Helgenberger and and Ricky Lake, and see what you come up with." And I wrote the episode and got a Writers Guild nomination for my first episode. Doesn't happen? Well, yeah. Well, then you think, "Oh, this is so easy." Then it doesn't happen. And it happened one other time for another ER episode I did, but only then. So I thought, wow, this is so great. Now, I was very nervous when I got that because John Sacred Young, who created China Beach, he was nominated as well, and everybody was like, "Who is this kid who's done this?" And John won, which was good. Mm-hmm. So because that would have been really bad. But that's how I got my start, because John Wells hired me on China Beach because I bumped into him in the grocery store. And we had stayed friends. And then I thought, my son was born. I was like, I don't know if I can make it here. I'm really nervous, even though I'd already done an after-school special on a China Beach and had this nomination. But I was back then a little nervous and not willing to take chances, so I went to medical school. So I went back to Harvard. And then John, again, in my 4th year, said, "Here's a script that Michael Crichton wrote, and we want you to read it and see what you think." And I read it, and I said, "Oh my gosh, it's like my life. Noah gets peed on, puked on, everything bad happens to him. I'm a 4th-year medical student. He's a 3rd-year medical student. It captures the doctor's life in a way that medical series had never done before. It was always about the patients. It reversed it."
Right.
And so I was like, it's fantastic, but it's really outdated. He goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, we don't have glass IV bottles. We don't use chloramphenicol as an antibiotic." He goes, "Fix it." And so I made the changes of the medical stuff. And then he called me a couple months later and said, "They're picking up the show. I don't think they like it, but do you want to break stories for 2 months?" And I was like a 4th-year medical student in huge debt. So I came out here and I loved it. I just was like, oh my God, I loved telling the stories all day. As you can hear, I could tell them all day long. And so I had a board, and I wrote every crazy thing that happened to me. It was called the show board, Serious, Humorous, Ordinary, and Workplace. I had hundreds of stories, and I brought in doctors and residents and nurses and PAs, and they would tell their stories. And we had so many stories because we burned through so much. So I said to John, in July before the show aired, "I'm having so much fun. Do you think I could stay?" And Harvard said I can do stuff on the weekends and whatever. And he said, "Sure, but there's no guarantee that the show will go." And I said, I'll take the chance. And then, so I stayed for 7 years, and I worked my way up from staff writer. So I started as the staff writer, and then staff writer, story editor, executive story editor, co-producer, producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, executive producer, showrunner, and then I went as the showrunner to SVU because I'd met Mariska on ER when she played Tony Edwards' girlfriend, and I just thought after 7 years, I don't know how many more, of these stories I could do. So I stayed on SVU for 11 years. And it was like, I don't know how much more of that I could do. Then I went to a whole different thing. Well, no, then I did another medical series with Patrick Wilson called A Gifted Man, and Jennifer Ely and Rochelle Lefevre. And then I did Under the Dome, again with Steven Spielberg, because he was the producer of ER, executive producer, and with Stephen King. So I thought, well, I should try to do something really, really different, which is, sort of the science fiction. But I compliment ourselves for Under the Dome because I don't think we were fully appreciated. It was on for 3 years, and the first year, the theme, every year I tried to have a theme. And so the first year was faith, fear, fascism. And Big Jim, played by Dean Norris, was, I think, the, perfect example of Donald Trump. And it was like completely about fascism. So it's like, now I say, just go watch Under the Dome and you'll see what we predicted.
So let me ask you something. So you stay 7 years in one series and then you go 11 years. Is it common for somebody to stay that long in a series?
Well, most series don't last that long.
Right.
So it's like, so I was really lucky to have 18 years on 2 series. It's crazy. And what kept me going, particularly, ER was where I really learned about writing and trying different things. And it was a different time. I mean, I worked with John Landgraf and who's now the head of FX, and the head of Showtime was also the executive, though they were the executives from NBC, and they just didn't give notes then. Now it's a whole different story.
Really?
So, they would say like maybe 2 little things. And they just really trusted us. So I always asked, like, how did I go from being trusted to getting like notes on Under the Dome, you know? So it's like, because it's a very different time and people are really scared and the pie has been divided into tiny little pieces. But I've had a very different career from my friends. I've only been on 4 shows. And, and most of my friends, and so I started in '94, so that's 23 years. I don't know anybody else who's just done straight through 4 shows.
Yeah. No, that's why I'm asking. It's kind of unusual. Yeah.
But I loved it, and I loved SVU because SVU was different in that every week I could just explore. It wasn't really about, you had to get in through like a murder, like an assault or something, but then I could just do a show about teen access to abortion, or, they let us do amazing things, guns, homeschooling, HIV deniers. Everything I was interested in, I just put into the show. Euthanasia. And so, and then I could work with any actor I wanted because we started winning the Emmy, like we won 6 years in a row. And so Amanda Plummer, Mariska, Leslie Caron, Cynthia Nixon, Ellen Burstyn, Anne Margaret. So I always wanted to work with Anne Margaret. I saw her in Bye Bye Birdie when I was like 5 years old. So it's like, I called her, will you do our show? You think I can win an Emmy? So it's like, yeah, we're on a run. So she did. And Carol Burnett I called and I said, will you do my show? And I said, I just have always loved your work. She said, yeah, I bet. What'd you do, watch me on Saturday nights with your parents? And I said, yes. She said, okay. And she was nominated, but she lost to Ellen Burstyn. And then Ellen Burstyn, I remember sitting with her thinking to myself, you're the most, you all know who Ellen Burstyn is, right? Yeah. You've seen The Exorcist and you've seen Requiem for a Dream and all of her, and Last Picture Show and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. So I thought, you're the most extraordinary person and you're extraordinary in your ordinariness. I've never met an actor who is so ordinary and extraordinary. It was just like, you could, and even Mariska said, she called me down to the set and she said, Neal, there's a homeless woman on the set and she won't leave. And I said, really? I'll come down. And it was Ellen. It was like, she was in wardrobe and she was like sort of methody, getting ready to do that. I said, Mariska, that's Ellen Burstyn. So it's like, oh, okay. So
she met the real actress. I'm sorry.
Exactly, yeah. So Ellen was like getting ready and Mariska's like, oh my God, I didn't know. Because she played a woman with bipolar disorder who's Christopher Maloney's mother. So what attracted me to SVU was I got to work with everyone from Jerry Lewis to Robin Williams for the 200th episode to Jeremy Irons. Anybody I wanted. And then I would bring in stars from old movies that I love. So has anybody seen the movie The Hustler with Paul Newman? So I asked Piper Laurie to come on the show. And I said, what was it like to come to Hollywood in the 50s? And she said, it was amazing. She said, my name's really Rosetta Jacobs, and they sat me down with a guy named Bernie Schwartz, who turned out to be Tony Curtis, and they told us, she said, she was from Detroit, she said, they told me, your name's Piper Laurie, you're from Arkansas, you're not a Jew, don't talk politics, and you'll do great. And they said the same thing to Tony Curtis, your name is Tony Curtis, you're not from the Bronx, you're not a Jew, don't talk politics, and we're putting the two of you into race car movies. And that's what, I was like, wow, I got like such an education of Hollywood from these people, because, you know, you're waiting, or Leslie Korone, who was, have you seen An American in Paris, or Gigi? So she was discovered by Gene Kelly in a ballet in Paris. She didn't speak English, and she told me her whole story of coming to the United States and not knowing English, and, you know, Debbie Reynolds, whose name really was Franny, meeting her, and she told me about Ava Gardner going with her to the commissary, and Ava wanted to go to the workman's commissary because, as Leslie said, Ava was a bit naughty. So I was like, how could you not want to, like, bring these people onto your show and, like, sit there and go, wow, and then what happened, you know? And, you know, and so I've been very blessed and having been able to work with, you know, just incredible people, and that kept me on SVU for a long time.
Yeah, but also I seem to kind of gravitate toward shows that also are advocacy.
Yes, that's me
right?
too. Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, I think that's my drive. You know, like, my mother worked for ACLU for like 45 years. My father was a doctor, and so I think I've always had this drive to be an advocate, and I was always, you know, interested in these issues growing up, you know, as, you know, in Denver, and just seeing what my mother was doing, like marching with the farm workers and getting arrested. So I think it had like an impact on me, and so when I was writing these shows, it was like a chance to do it but what I loved about SVU particularly was that, and Dick Wolf really liked about the shows we did, is that we could do this show, like, for instance, on euthanasia, and Mariska's character, Maloney, Belzer, and Ice-T would have different perspectives on this mother who's, and you know, as a writer, I could set up a perfect scenario. A woman played by Elizabeth Mitchell and Judd Hirsch, if you saw Ordinary People, or he's done a lot of Taxi, things like that, played the pediatrician. So I gave the kid a disease, Tay-Sachs, which is always fatal, horrible suffering for the kid, no hope. And then the mother decides whether or not to euthanize the baby, and gets the help of the pediatrician. So every character had a different point of view. Like, Maloney has kids on the show, and so he said, you know, I couldn't let my kids suffer. And Belzer is a devout Jew and said, you know, it's really God who has to make this decision. And, you know, Mariska didn't know. Her character is like, I don't know what I would do. So you can play all of the viewpoints of the audience through the four characters without, you know, now, certainly, as you're saying, Tova, the fact that I chose to do these certain shows reveals it's not objective. But I tried to be open to different points of view through my characters. And I think that served us well, so that we weren't being didactic or pedantic and trying to teach you something. I never said, like, I hate this word, edutainment, like, oh, we do edutainment. It's like, no. And people say, well, is it education or is it entertainment? And I say, I don't ever think about it ever in those terms. I hope it educates people about issues that people are struggling with, and I hope it, but entertain feels like you're on a couch and you're just going to be soaking up something and not really being challenged. So I don't think about those words. I think about what is the best, most compelling story I can tell for the audience. And then I get so excited when I'm doing the show, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to have George, like, you know, just be about to give it up and smoke dope, and then this kid says, help, help, you know, it's my brother, and then he's going to do anything he can to save this kid, and he has to make this choice kind of before television was doing, you know, in-your-face stuff, because, you know, video cameras were still heavy, and it was, you know, but that news guy was like making it a thing, so it was kind of presaging all of that, and then Tony sees it on the television, and he has to make these choices, and he becomes the reluctant hero because, as you saw at the beginning of the episode, he's not been renewed at the hospital, and now because he's this hero, it's like, And I like the switch where you see this little girl. And I always say, if a child gives you the bracelet or necklace that they made in school, very bad sign. Goodbye to that child. It's like, oh no. So she gives.
What did she die of?
She died of a clot that had formed in her liver or spleen. I can't remember. And she fell off the wall, and she had a clot, and the clot was holding the blood from keeping her from bleeding out, and then the clot burst, and they didn't know that, and you wouldn't really have a way to know that, and then she bled out, and she bled to death.
So there's no way to know that.
No way to know that, and so I don't think you saw that coming, but
No.
But that the little girl would die, and Noah would have to deal with it. Whereas in the other room, and I love the way Chulak, the set was just luck. So I'll talk about that for 1 second. So the set was luck. We shot in a defunct hospital for the pilot in East LA. And the only thing that's different between the pilot and the series, set-wise, is that the hallways are wider on the series because it's just easier to get the cameras through. And the trauma rooms had real tile, and it was too expensive, and they would chip and break. So it's faked with linoleum that's woven. But otherwise, it looks the same. And we had these amazing sight lines that you just hadn't seen on television before. You could see all the way through. You could close the blinds in the trauma rooms or open them so you could see all the way across. And we would change it up from year to year and put glass walls up and do things. But what was really amazing, and I give credit to Lance Gentile, the other doctor on the show, he was an emergency physician. He and I would fight because I'm a pediatrician, and he'd be like, treat him and street him, and I'd be like, get their story. And so it was always, so you see all of our fighting comes out on the show. So he's like, I said, oh yeah, I had this girl, and she came in and she had sprained her ankle, but it turned out she was dyslexic, and he'd be in the room, in the writer's room, oh shit, just treat him and street him. And it's so it'd be good, because that would be George would be I've got to save this girl, and Tony Edwards would be get her out, you fixed her ankle. So what was amazing about ER and had a huge influence, or I should ask you, how did ER change television visually, and how did it affect West Wing? So if you think about it, if you have an answer, and I'll tell you the answer, which is Tommy Schlamme, who's a director, directed a number of episodes of ER, and the Steadicam was invented maybe a year or so before ER. And Lance Gentile and Leslie Glatter, who's directing the Menendez brothers movie for Dick Wolf right now with Edie Falco, she directed this movie with Joe Montana called State of Emergency that Lance wrote about an emergency room. And what was different about it was they had the ability to use a Steadicam. And Leslie was a dancer and a choreographer, so she does all these beautiful moves. She was the directing producer of Homeland for many, many, many years, and so has this elegant approach as a director. So she directed that, and they realized that you didn't have to lay down dolly track and do all the stuff that you had to do in order to do tracking shots, and you had to make sure that the camera wasn't picking up the dolly and all of that. Suddenly, you have a camera, and the operator is just moving through space. So so we just used that because it was perfect. So we have all these walk and talks, or that beautiful segment where we're going in between with Lily, who is now a director, Lily Marier. She was the best nurse who could push through the doors. So every time I would write an episode, I'd have Lily push through the doors because she knew how to do it. And then you'd follow with the Steadicam through the doors. And it was just you don't even see TV now, I think, that looks like this. It's just so incredible what Chulak did. And it was all because of the Steadicam, because you couldn't have track to do all that.
So this thing in the show, when you go from one emergency to the other room, was that on the show a lot?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. That was
because it adds so much drama. Yes. My God, between this room and that room, and
pace and pathos.
We were in suspense.
Pace and pathos. So how did that have anything to do with West Wing? Well, Tommy was the writing producer or directing producer of West Wing, and he did the pilot. And West Wing has all these roundy rounds, we call it, and oneers. Well, West Wing wouldn't exist without ER. So ER had all of that first. And then it's just translated to West Wing, where they're always walking and talking, Alice and Janney, and then she goes off, and Rob Lowe passes, and you stay with Rob, so you're with Allison, and then he comes by, and then the camera's here, and then camera follows him, and then you pass, Richard Schiff, and he picks it up, but if you watch ER, the same thing. And so that's how...
How many cameras?
Just one with a Steadicam.
Wow.
And then we would do, obviously we had scenes where then we would do coverage and stuff, but then we got like so fancy, like we thought we were like making Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, where, if you know about Rope, where it's like Hitchcock, did no cuts, and then he would sort of like go to black so that they could change the magazine on the camera. Well, I can't remember how many minutes the magazine was, because we shot on film. It's like 8 minutes or 10 minutes. So we would do like oneers for 8, and then we'd always like know which actors to put last and which ones to put first, because the ones that could go last wouldn't screw up the whole oneer. And so we started to write it so that, don't put so-and-so there, put him there, because, and the same thing you start to learn with actors is, when I did SVU and we'd have these big scenes in the squad room, it's like, don't put him or that person last, because he'll finally get all the lines and it'll be great, but don't put, and then the others would be like, oh, here we go. Because if he was shot first, it would just be a nightmare. So we'd always say to the director, when we did what were called tone meetings, so you do a concept meeting where, as you all know, you talk about the elements of the scene, the makeup, the special effects or whatever, and then you do a tone meeting one-on-one with the director, and you say, well, for this actor, it's best to shoot him last, because it takes him a while to get all the lines, but once we've done like a coverage with 7 actors, and we're like on scene 12 K with him, then it's perfect. So you kind of learn how to organize these things, with a lot of experience.
Amazing. How did you get an agent? At which point did you get an agent?
So I got an agent off of my AFI films.
Wow.
And but the way I got her was my cousin, whom I was living with in Van Nuys, was friends with her mahjong partner, had a son who was the AD on Hill Street Blues. So I went to Hill Street Blues, I was a kid, and I met Rick Wallace. I ended up hiring him as a director on SVU, and I said, do you know any agents? And he said, yeah, and he introduced me to some agents, and I got an agent, and she struck Nan Blitman, if you remember Nan Blitman. Of
course.
And she sold Lost Boys. So then she went to CAA, and so I just got my first agent and she said, you're going to have to do all the work, but I'll be your agent. So I got her because I just started asking people to introduce me to anybody, and that's how it worked.
There you go. Either supermarket, run into somebody, or you just contact anybody and
you just have to put yourself out there.
Ask people.
Yep, you have to put yourself out there.
You have to put yourself out there and
For sure.
ask people all the time. Do you know an agent? Do you know this? Do you know this? Do you know that?
And now it's changed
Do
a
you
bit
know
with
grocery stores around
exactly.
here? Yeah.
It's changed with managers now. So I think a lot of times people start out with managers because
Right.
the business has changed so much that there are not very many agencies anymore. There used to be a lot more agencies, and it's so concentrated that
Yeah.
managers do often a lot of what the agents used to do.
Yeah.
And so I had a manager years ago. I don't now. I just have an agent, but I have a team. I never had a team before. Now I have a team. I have 4 agents for TV, and I have 2 movie agents, and I have my VR agent and my unscripted team. It's like crazy. And it used to be like I had 1 agent. Now it's like, whoa,
Well, the students, maybe somebody wants to ask questions. Okay, let's start.
Hi.
Hi. So for the fast-paced scenes where you're going between, like when the 2 kids were being saved by the doctors, how much is in the teleplay beforehand in terms of like the steady cam shots, or is that more of like the DP and the shot list afterward that decides
So we don't write Steadicam or anything. In fact, I hate scripts that tell you what to do visually, and the less prose, the better. Like, I don't like scripts that tell you how characters are feeling in the prose. Let the dialogue say that. Let the scene say that, but don't say it in the prose. It's like, and he feels and she feels this, and it's like, no.
Yeah.
It's in the scene. So the scenes are all written where it's cutting in between the rooms. Trauma room 1 and trauma room 2. So if you were reading the script, you'd see trauma room 1, George and Tony says, you get out of here, and then it cuts to Eric, and it says, follow nurse Lily 2. So it was, because I knew that Lily was literally the best. She knew how to do it, how to like get out of the way of the camera to do it. So I said, not nurse, some of the other ones, nurse Lily into trauma room 2, and you're picking up where Eric and Noah are talking. But it didn't say use a steady camera, whatever. But that's what you do in your tone meeting, where you talk to the director and say, how are you thinking about shooting this? Because, they're itinerant. They don't, unless it's the directing producer of the show, they come and they go. So I always tried to use a small cadre of directors, because I got burned so many times, and the DGA so fucked us that you can't, fire a director and bring in one of your directors from your show. You have to hire a brand new director. Now, as a writer, they can just fire you and you're like, goodbye, you're gone. But the directors, so you could have a terrible director and you're really screwed. So I've only had it happen once where this guy was directing, and we couldn't see Chris Maloney in the scene. It was like, where's Waldo? It was such a wide shot. And he was obsessed with painting things pink in scenes, like a pink fire hydrant and a pink thing.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. He was like an artiste. So we did have to fire him, and we brought one of our directors on who'd done so many shows that he could come in on day 3 and kind of pick it up. But they've made it very difficult. So you kind of have to be very careful with the directors, and you want to you want to give people a shot. So what's happened, which I think is really good if you're a director, is you want to shadow. And so we've given Chad Lowe, who was an actor who directs a lot, or Eric LaSalle, who's directing almost all the time now. He's a directing producer on one of the Chicago PD, I think. They shadow for a number of episodes, and then.
Do you know what shadowing is?
So you just
tell them.
So you work. So you attach to a director, and you're just the director's shadow. So you go to all the casting, tone meeting, concept meeting, all the meetings with you're just the fly on the wall, and you're on the set the whole time. So it's 7 or 8 day prep and hopefully 8 day shoots. There are, I guess, shows that are 7 now. There are a lot of shows that are 9, 10, 11 because things get out of hand. But so it's so you have to be available to do that, and you just shadow really good directors. And how do you do that? You've got to find directors and put yourself out there. But you do that and through the different programs, and that's how a lot of people get their directing breaks, because they're shadowing directors, and that's how we've been doing it for years. So that's a long answer to your question. So we give the director, that's why you want a director with a vision. I've worked with these, the guy who won the Emmy last year for Game of Thrones. He directed Under the Dome, and it has an amazing eye. So you want really great directors, and there aren't a lot of great directors. There are a lot of workman-like directors. So you want great directors, and great writers, and great actors, and I really believe that if you have a voice as a writer or a vision as a director, you will get work. It just can take, a lot of effort. So.
Thanks.
I was just wondering what sort of challenges you faced while writing for multiple seasons of TV series, and how did you negotiate them, particularly with such intricacies as foreshadowing?
What?
Each show has been different. So that's an interesting question, because ER was a room show. SVU, we met maybe once a month, but writers were working sort of with me, and they would put their scripts or their beats on a board and do it that way. A Gifted Man was kind of a combination, and Under the Dome was a room show where we actually pretty much wrote the outlines in the room. So So for Under the Dome, as I was saying, each year I tried to have a theme to guide us. So the first year was faith, fear, fascism. The second year was faith versus science. And so I brought on a new character who was a science teacher and sort of getting into those issues. And the last year was the individual versus the group. So I had these guiding, so for a show like Under the Dome, where you're like stuck under a dome, it's like you got to have some ideas. And it helped me to, and you're working with CBS where they want to have like tornadoes and floods and stuff, but that worked well the first season, but then we kind of ran out of tornadoes, floods, fires, food shortages, things like that. So to have this theme that you could really plumb, I think was helpful. And we planned way ahead in the season. So like we have, like for ER, for instance, dry erase boards for 3 dry erase boards for the season, and the 4th with all kinds of story ideas. So the 1 through 7, 8 through 15, 16 through 22 or 23, 24, 25, depending on how many we're doing that year. And we could sort of put, like we would talk each day about a different character. So if it was Gloria Rubin's character, Jeannie Boulet, who is the first ongoing character with HIV, who doesn't die. Because it was in 1995, right when antiretrovirals were available. So we were able to do this story where there's still so much fear about you could get infected by a doctor or whatever. And so we were able to do that. We could put beats for episode 1, we're going to try this, and 3 here, and we're going to move it, the story down to episode 7. We might want to end it in 9, or we'll carry this the whole year. Or when Eric LaSalle's son was deaf, in like year 4, it's like, should he have a cochlear implant or not? So we had this, 3-dimensional kind of room and a way to kind of look at the whole season. So that helped us a lot. So we were always looking at the whole season. SVU was different because each episode was self-contained, but we were still tracking Mariska's character or Chris's character. Mariska's the product of a rape, for instance. But it helped us to have this wide expanse so that we could really play with more than just 5 episodes. So that's how we thought through it, and we knew how George was going to leave in year 5, in year 4, because I pitched 3 sort of pivotal episodes to get him out in year 4 that we then did in year 5. That he just kept raising the stakes and challenging everyone. So we had a lot of thinking that went into that. So in terms, and then foreshadowing. So what would happen is, and I think was really helpful, is there'd be arcs for the season or half season, and then within an episode, and I was reminded of this, I was just talking to Eric LaSalle because Glenn Headley, a wonderful actress, just passed away from a pulmonary embolism a couple weeks ago, and she was on year 3 playing a pediatric surgeon who really clashed with Eric, and it was fantastic episodes. And so it would be about his kind of maturing, but there was one episode, so you'd have a wide arc over many episodes. But you'd have an arc within the episode where a character would learn a lesson. Like I wrote an episode in year 3 for George again, where he wanted to save a kid who had cystic fibrosis, who wanted to be allowed to die, but he was a minor. And Laura Innes's character said, "Is it about you or about him?" So that was a pivotal turning point. So in the episode, he really grew as a character, but that was part of a wider, if that makes sense, sort of arc for him as becoming more a mature person. So I thought about it both across episodes and, of course, within an episode, getting the character someplace, learning something new, dealing with a conflict or a challenge.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paladon.
Hi.
I get a question. You mentioned bumping into an old friend doing the groceries, and that's how you got the opportunity. For someone that it's like most of us that don't have
doesn't
like
shop, that doesn't
shop and as often,
the
or
phone
that
to
happens
deliver.
to have a friend,
Right.
which is like, how do you think that it will be like a great way to start your ideas? Because
Right.
I'm a writer.
So I bumped into him, but I had something to tell him, which was, I just wrote and directed an ABC After School special.
Okay.
So it wasn't like, hey, could you give me a job? I don't have anything. So you have to have some stuff. Okay. You have to have scripts. Like if you don't have a script and you're going to plan to write one, so you have to take advantage of any kind of serendipity that happens. Or if you're a director, you have to have some reels. So then what do you do? Okay, so then there are lots of things. Like you can go to look at the alumni here. And you can go to things like Harvard would, which, you know, is limited to people who went to Harvard, but not always. So if you go online and find it, there's like all these like events that are networking. And so you can go to these things. You can, you know, if you've been to a college before, you can find out what agents, like I went to Colorado College, so there's an agent, Ted Miller, who's at CAA. And anytime somebody from Colorado College comes to town and they want to be a writer, particularly because he's a literary agent, he'll see these young writers because he went to CC and he knows how it was. So it's like you have to really start to think about your affinity groups.
Can I tell you something? I worked for Alan Pakula, and he did all the President Men and whatnot, and before that Warren Beatty. Anyway, he would be so busy and he wouldn't pay attention, and resume will come and he'll just, well, but if somebody was from Yale, which was his alma mater, he'd always see him.
Yeah, so it's true. So you have to figure out who you have a connection with or an affinity with, because it's true. Oh, I love To Kill a Mockingbird. And I love, now I bet you nobody has seen, but Mulligan and Bakula did Love with a Proper Stranger.
Yes.
Do you know it? With
Of
Natalie
course.
Wood and Steve
With
McQueen?
Natalie Wood.
The best. It's the best.
And since a lot of writers, they always write, they were thinking about like feature films.
Who wants
now
to
we're
do that
living in
now?
like the golden age of TV. Right now, of
Supposedly.
opportunities, there's a lot of
I would
networks, a
debate
lot of
that.
shows. What do you recommend us young writers to pursue, like
All right, so-
writing for TV or film?
Yeah. So here's a good story. I have a friend named Kit Williamson, and he wanted to sit in on the writers' room on my show. So I said, sure. He does a show called East Siders. It's a web series. He just wrote last year a pilot for CBS. It didn't get picked up, but he pitched it to Lisa Kudrow's company. So the way he started was not like, I'm going to make a feature, and it's like, who can make features now? It's so hard anyway.
Really?
So I'm going to work in television. He was, I'm going to do East Siders, or I'm going to do a web series and make it as great as I can, and it's gotten a lot of attention. So he was able to parlay that into a pitch to a couple of companies to therefore land a pilot at CBS. So you have to be very creative in term, and it's not like it's not about setting your sights too high. It's about looking at all the options. Like I said when I first came in, that I'm doing a VR show because, and it's actually, I met this guy who went to AFI, and he's one of the people at this company, and his partner also went to AFI at this company, and they were hired. But you know, I'm looking for all kinds of different ways, and I think that this show could be a back door into doing a series, but I think it fits really well content-wise for a VR show, and that's where things are going. So you have to kind of be open to maybe less traditional approaches, and not say, oh, I've got to do a show for CBS or Fox or something, but
Right.
it could be for, so I think, so when I was starting out, there really only was ABC, CBS, NBC. HBO was just starting, and Fox was just starting. And there was UPN and then, but that's gone, and the CW, before the CW, whatever it was before. But there was very little cable. So now there's so much more. It's about breaking in, but you have to have the material. And you have to have really good material. And there's a lot of bad material out there. So I think it's having, you know, your best calling card, and then, you know, getting onto a webisode series or a VR series or something that can then lead to something new for you. So new meaning, don't just think I have to do a feature film or television. There's lots of ways to do it now.
Yeah. People get noticed with shorts and whatnot. I mean, you know.
all the time.
The director does like an amazing, 5-minute short, and everybody sees it and gets hired to do a feature.
It used to be music videos. That was like, when I was starting, it was after-school specials. Like Robert Mandel, who did the movie FX, he started out doing after-school specials, so many people. Then it was music videos. Now it's webisode series and, web series stars and, all of that. So it's really changed.
Music video and commercials.
Yeah.
All right, hello.
Hi.
This is my first time that I've seen or watched a ER episode. My question is, how do you, in your writing room, how do you juggle the tone of the episode? Because you keep the audience engaged with George Clooney scenes, and very suspenseful, by the way. How do you keep him active? How do you keep hiring the stakes and still know when to cut back to the ER room and have those lighter scenes? So I seen your stroke of a great writer from just this one episode. So yeah, thank you.
Well, gosh, I can remember sitting in my office at Warner Brothers a block away writing this episode. You kind of, at least the way I did this one was, I knew what the two stories were. And then I had some little things, like there was like this whole sort of tension between Eric and Gloria early on, where he's making her do some stuff and she does it and all of that. That was carrying what we call carrying water, for that relationship that was going to be on more in future episodes, but not letting it go. So you have to like carry water, lay pipe is what we for future episodes. So keep certain little things going, and then sort of break it out like by acts. Like what are the elements that you want to tell in this hero's journey for George, like the reluctant hero, where he has to make it was easy to raise the stakes because you think like the big thing is going to be saving the kid, but it's not. It's like saving the kid in the tunnel, and that's so great. But then what's left? And he trachs him, and then he has to make this decision. Does he go to a hospital that's not a good trauma center, or does he take the chance that the kid will crash in the helicopter and then there'll be nothing he can do? So then you raise the stakes yet again, and then you have a whole act where you can be in the helicopter and he's fighting, and then you tie the characters back to, because there's a television journalist there, it's being broadcast like live, which never had really been done. And so it's like, wow, so they're all watching Clooney and they're like freaking out. So it's really, that's the writer's craft of like trying to raise the stakes by the end of each act for the next act, but telling a story of a reluctant hero. It's like, that's a really hard question to answer, because it's sort of like, it's just what brews inside you. And so, but then you have to like get it out and organize it. And you have to know sort of the beats. So the way we did it in the room was we would do a few, like maybe sort of the main beats of each act. We didn't do a lot of breaking on ER. We would do like a few beats per act, and then the writer would go off. And we only met Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays on ER. Tuesdays and Thursdays were writing days, but we met all afternoon, and we seemed to be able to do it. And then we had a lot of production meetings and all of the producing side in the mornings, every morning. And so I wrote the outline, and then we all converged again. We all met, and everybody would give notes on the outline, and then then I went back and wrote the script, and then I would get notes. And it would be interesting, because sometimes you would get everybody would like give you their script. And this is before final draft, so you had to go like to Janice at the Warner Brothers typing pool and give her your script. And I would always like do it all overnight, so I lived nearby then, and she'd be there. She was the night person. She was great, and she would type it. It was so beautiful. And then we displaced all those people because now final draft puts the asterisks in, and we weren't able to do that back then. We typed up the script and they had to retype it. So we didn't have the flexibility. I marvel now at like the flexibility we have. Maybe it's not so good because we can do so many iterations now with final draft. It's like, oh, I'll put out more pages, more pages, more pages. When I was on China Beach, it was the very end of film, as editing on a moviola, and then moving to where we are, final cut and things. So we had an orchestra on China Beach that played the music. I mean, it was amazing, and that's gone for the most part. West Wing had an orchestra. So, the technology has helped us in a way, but it's like almost like put and there's no limits. Whereas we had limits when we were still doing ER. Like there was a limit, like you could only have so many iterations of the script because the typing pool could just only do so many, But now you could have like changes all day long, because you're doing it yourself. So there was maybe somewhat more discipline back then, I think. In a way, I haven't thought about that, but your question makes it so I think we were a little bit more disciplined about things back then because we just didn't have the technology that let us do all the things that we could do. I couldn't on China Beach go in, the great thing about being a writer, producer in television is that you trump the director. So in the sense that you get the as a showrunner, I get the final cut with the network. So if I didn't like something, I can say to the editor, push in, can you blow that up? Blow it up 10%, 20, try that. Oh, can you track over this way? Can you do this? Can you change the color saturation a little bit? You couldn't do that on film. You couldn't do that on a Steenbeck. Now you can do everything. It's amazing, and you can fix things much more easily. And I think TV looks a lot better. If you look at old shows like dramas from the 60s or 70s, they look kind of crappy, or 80s, because you just didn't have the time to do all the things that we can do now. I can and the directors always say they hate it, but then they always seem to like it when it looks better. So it's a give and take. So we can make things look a lot better, but we pay a price maybe in our discipline. It's all about the story and your gut. That's a hard question to answer.
It's a good one, anyway.
Thank you for coming in.
Sure.
How do you get into the writing room? Like, if you've made it like a small web series or something like that, do companies or studios call you or your agent and ask them to come in, or how do you
do it?
Yeah.
2 ways. Number one, you're an assistant to the showrunner. So all the writers, I was at dinner the other night and I saw my first assistant who's she was the showrunner on the Ryan Phillippe series last season. So all of the assistants I've had except for one who's in post-production and the one I have now who wants to do development. So Barbie, Linda, James, Mike, Ryan, Ken have all become writers. So how'd that happen? Because they wrote specs, and then they got hired as an assistant to the showrunner or one of the executive producers, and we liked their scripts, and we gave them a script as a freelance, because you have to give freelance episodes by sort of WGA rules so that it gives people like you a chance. So one is you get a job as an assistant to preferably the showrunner or one of the upper level producers. Second way, actually there are 3 ways. Second way, you're the writer's room assistant. So you do all of the notes in the writer's room and you type and you write on the board and you type things up every night. And this guy Drace, who did Under the Dome the first year, I gave him a script the first year, the second year, and made him a staff writer the third year. So now he's writing. So that's the second way. The third way is to be a script coordinator. So a script coordinator is what Janice used to be in the office typing. The script coordinators are handing out the scripts on the set, or they're collating what the writer does, because there's, whatever the order is, pink, blue, pink, white, blue, pink, green, brown, salmon, cherry, all the different colors, and then repeating them and all that. Somebody has to keep track of all that. That's the script coordinator. And so, not the script supervisor who's on the set, the script coordinator. And so I've worked with a number of script coordinators who have spec scripts, and I've given them breaks too. And then they usually go from script coordinator to writer's assistant in the room to a writer on the show. Or you're a playwright. So you've written a play. And yes, if you did
by the way, nobody calls you and invites you. You have to
so you have to you have to be a networker and find and meet up with everybody in town who's an assistant to an agent, and they'll tell you who are the writer's assistants, and you have to start meeting writer's assistants in town, and you have to just start asking, and you'll find these people, and they're all your age, and that's how I've worked with so many who are all writers now, and that's how they did it. And then they got into writers programs. I had 2 people who were my assistants, and they got into the Warner Brothers writing programs. I actually had hired the Warner Brothers, the person who runs that program. I had hired him as a writer on ER. So it's like, hey, can you look at this, script. So those are ways in as a writer. Producer, there are different ways, as well, like starting out, you can go to the DGA program as an AD, even though they say, we won't take you if you want to be a director. That's not true. You get a lot of experience as an AD. That's a fantastic program, and then you can move around and do stuff. But, you start out as a second AD.
On the side.
Second AD, first AD, and then our directing producer on ER, Peter Lito, started out as craft service and then was an AD. And then he directed over 40 episodes of SVU. So there are lots of ways, but you just have to really push and get to know these people in Hollywood. It's not so much to know the agents and stuff. You got to know, and there's the UTA list, so you should look at that too.
You said it was the UTA list?
Yeah, from the agency, UTA agency. And so they have job openings. Or Harvard Wood. Go online and look up Harvard Wood and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Sure, thank you for having me.
What's so inspiring about listening to you is how excited you are about the work even now, even about Janice's typing.
Yeah.
And clearly, from the way you talk, you're so deeply rooted in early work. So who are some of the writers that inspire you?
That's a good question. For TV or for
in any way?
Well, the person who really inspired me the most was a guy named Paul Manning, who wrote on LA Law and then ER, because he was my mentor, and he passed away very young and sadly, and he gave me time and really sat with me, and I would pitch ideas to him and he would pitch back ideas to me, and so on. He would tell me, just write the scene, don't worry about it, because I'd get very tight. So he was like the person who really helped me on the show more than anybody else I ever worked with in terms of writing. But I like film noir, and it's interesting because I could talk about directors a lot, but it's interesting about the writers. But there's with the Writers Guild, we've had we sometimes talk about which writers to give awards to, and before they pass away and stuff. So I've always been looking at writers, but I love, it's interesting because movies, as Tova, I'm sure probably, I don't know, you probably agree, it's a director's medium in a way. And writers are really important, but TV is a writer's medium. So if you go back to look at, I love Twilight Zone, and Rod Serling is probably one of the, I think, best writers, and and David Lynch. So I always said that Under the Dome was a cross between Twilight Zone and Twin Peaks, because it had this strange element to it that was inexplicable, and yet it had a humanity, and there was something about Rod Serling that had this humanity to it, whereas Hitchcock wasn't so. The Hitchcock TV series wasn't as humane as the stuff in Twilight Zone. So I would probably say Rod Serling was, and Paddy Chayefsky. If you've watched any of Paddy Chayefsky's films, they're really quite beautiful and well done. But I don't know if have you ever watched Twilight Zone?
Mm-hmm.
So they're just so well crafted. And I like well crafted things that have that make that, and I also like being surprised. But I talked about Ellen Burstyn being she's extraordinary in her ordinariness. I like television shows or even movies that are so well crafted that they're surprising, but of course it could only be that way. And that's what was always so interesting about ER, because with real stories, the reality was so strange, and yet real. So I'm always looking for, it's like, of course now with politics, it's like it's surreal. Like you couldn't like write a show like that. It's like Veep looks like kind of like sort of silly compared to like what we really have. But it's like, how does it just make it feel like it's just right? And yet it's a twist, but not for the sake of a twist. And that's what I liked about Rod Serling, because there was like this deep humanity to it. And there were twists, but you went, oh, of course.
Did you ever try writing comedy? Like sitcom?
Not a half hour, but we did try to do comedy. Not the episode you saw tonight, but we did try to find the humor, certainly on ER. SV was a little harder to do. We certainly tried it on Under the Dome, but I haven't. But I don't know that it's that. That's a different world in terms of what the writers' room is like. No, but now I'm trying to do, an unscripted series. So, it's a time to experiment, I think.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
We see the reason for your success, because as he said, you're just still bubbling with energy and passion for, the job that you're doing after all this year. And I'm sure there was you were 100 times more like this when you were
Yes. Now if I could just get myself to write my play that I'm working on, it's like, oh, it's so hard. I know how hard it is. It's like I'm trying to do it every day. It's hard.
Yeah.
But I'm trying.
But you're doing it. Anyway, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.